Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs War Room Update. You heard correctly, we are no longer the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, the JCPA, but now we will be known as the JCFA, the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Today we are on day number 327 of the war with Gaza. It started way back then on the 7th of October with the massacre, and really the war has continued on without respite ever since. In Gaza, in the last 24, 36 hours, there have been dramatic developments. Yesterday, IDF forces managed to secure the release of an Israeli Arab Muslim who had been held hostage by Hamas, Farhan Qadi, rejoining his family, a father of 11 children from Israel's south, from the town of Rahat, really in a daring mission carried out by the IDF forces in the southern Gaza Strip. Just today, about an hour and a half ago, the IDF also announced that it had managed to recover the body of Shaked Dahan, also from the southern Gaza Strip. That means that now we are left still, even after those really daring operations, with 107 hostages still being held by the genocidal terrorists. The IDF also announced today that it had neutralized and exploded a 3-kilometer long tunnel in the central Gaza Strip. Just to give you an idea, at that part of the Gaza Strip, it is only about 6 to 8 kilometers wide, and so a 3-kilometer tunnel really did span very much of the Gaza Strip at that point. In Judea and Samaria, also dramatic developments with the IDF launching a really quite an extensive operation in Samaria, in Jenin, in Tubas, in Tulkarem, facing there what was clearly an imminent threat. We've seen really a spike in terrorism coming from that area over the last few months. It's being led by Zahir Jabarin, the replacement for Saleh Haruri in Hamas, and for the person who's meant to be running the terrorist activities for Hamas, excuse me, in Judea and Samaria. And he has been trying his utmost really to initiate, develop, and carry out as many terrorist attacks from Hamas in that area to relieve some of the pressure on Hamas in the Gaza Strip. There are also continuing signs of the demise of the Palestinian Authority created by the Oslo Accords. It now appears that the PA is losing the little modicum of control that it still had over Judea and Samaria. Financially, it's really getting to a point where it can no longer be sustained, and its control of the different areas that it's meant to be in control of is quickly diminishing. Today, as part of those operations in the northern area of Samaria, we also found ourselves facing officers and soldiers, yes, soldiers of the PA who are fighting with the terrorists against IDF forces. In Lebanon, after really the tremendous attack on Sunday morning to thwart what Hezbollah had planned as a massive response to the elimination of Fuad Shukr, the war of attrition has carried on. Hezbollah, according to the reports, are still trying to understand the extent of the damage that was caused, the extent of the IDF attacks on their rocket launchers in the south, and just trying to understand how the IDF managed to so thoroughly infiltrate the organization to come up with exact intelligence that took us exactly to their launchers and prevented that large-scale attack. From Yemen, the Houthis are continuing on with their aggression, really going under the radar. No one's talking much about the Houthis attacking the ships moving along in the Gulf of Aden and up into the Red Sea. Maybe now there's an event which could possibly awaken not only the world leaders, but also ecological groups, as one of the ships that they attacked, a Greek flag ship, an oil carrier that was carrying 150,000 tons of crude oil, now seems to be leaking that oil into the southern area of the Red Sea. Maybe if the attacks on Israel didn't bother the rest of the world too much, maybe now the ecological disaster that's impending will bring about a different response. All of that really brings us to the head of the snake, Iran. after the elimination of Ismail Haniyeh, supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, decided and announced that Iran would be carrying out a massive attack on Israel. In his words, he said that it was going to be larger than the April 13th, 14th attack, in which they fired 330 plus rockets, UAVs, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. This response was promised to be larger, but that response hasn't yet come yet. Now, that event has to be taken in its context. The connection between Hamas and Iran is not something which should be taken lightly. It seemed to be that the desire to destroy Israel had managed to gap an abyss, a 1400-year abyss between Sunnah and Shia, the two different factions of Islam that are fighting against each other. Now, Ayatollah Khamenei represents Shia. He is vowing a response against Israel for the death of a Sunni leader. That's something which really did bring into question, well, have we managed to get over that gap? But thankfully, the Ayatollah, in his great wisdom, it has to be said, just recently tweeted out a very clear message to the Islamic world, saying that the battle between the Husseini front and the Yazidi front is ongoing. That means the battle between Shia and Sunnah is ongoing. The battle, does he necessarily mean that this is the excuse for not revenging the attack on Ismail Haniyeh? Or is he trying to give a message specifically to Saudi Arabia that is considering, as reports say, deepening its connections with the US administration and even possibly moving forward with some type of normalization with Israel? To try and help us a little bit understand what's going on with the regime of the Ayatollahs, we're joined today by a special guest, Catherine Perez-Shakdam, who's the executive director of We Believe in Israel and the Forum for Foreign Relations, a former consultant to the UN Security Council on Yemen, and an expert on Islamic terrorism, radicalization, and anti-Semitism. Catherine is perfect to help us better understand what Khamenei is thinking, since she was once a journalist who regularly contributed to the official mouthpieces of the Iranian regime in Tehran itself, and even had the opportunity to meet with the butcher of Tehran, with Ibrahim Raisi himself before he was elected president of Iran, and to actually sit and meet with Ali Khamenei himself. Catherine, thanks very much for joining us. A great pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine, I can assure you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction.
So really, among your other titles and degrees, and really they are extensive, I have to say, just for our audience, I know they don't include necessarily a degree in psychology, but give us a little bit of an insight into what Khamenei is thinking, as you wrote in the Times of Israel, this morning, or the JNS, I forget. I apologize to both organizations if I've somehow slighted them or offended them. What you wrote really today is that the release of Farhan al-Qadi really does expose the hypocrisy of Iran. They're keeping it all quiet. How can it be that the Zionist government, apartheid government, as it's so often referred to, is now endangering the lives of its soldiers in order to free an Arab Muslim from the genocidal hands of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, in the same way as it would do for all of the other hostages? Give us a little bit of an insight as to what he's thinking, Catherine.
Sure. It was in the Times of Israel, actually. Look, I think that, this narrative that the regime has perpetuated, and that since 1979, that, the Zionist entity, Israel, is really out there to get, Muslim community, that they are profoundly racist, that we have produced a state of apartheid, and that, it's something that defines the word Zionism. I mean, it has been very clearly, I think, derailed in that, of course, the state of Israel, since its establishment, has thrived and worked tirelessly, very, very hard to make sure that all communities are protected equally. Everyone is equal under the law, as it should be. And I think that Israel has done a tremendous great good in really promoting multiculturalism and proving to the world that it can work when you when you commit to it. And the fact today that Farhan al-Qadi has been able to rejoin his loved ones, and I'm profoundly grateful to the IDF to have exerted that kind of effort to make sure that he would go home, just as they would for anyone else, for that matter. I think really unsettled the regime in Tehran, in that what can it say when you have the Jewish state literally standing for a Muslim man, an Arab Muslim man, an Arab Muslim Sunni man, no less, and make sure that he goes home, where he belongs, and doing that at a great deal of risk to its soldiers. And very often we assume that if you're part of the IDF, then you must be a Jew and an Israeli Jew. It's not always true. I mean, the IDF again is a reflection of the state of Israel. And it's the multitude of communities that are that have called and continue to call Israel home. And so I think that there's a lot of assumptions that are being made, and of course the regime has a lot to answer to when it comes to that. And I'm glad that it happened. I'm glad that it's home. I'm glad that again we have visible proof that it's a lie. It's just a fallacy. This argument does not stand anymore. It never did. But it was perpetuated because, again, of the assumption that are being carried out by the likes of CNN and other mainstream media organizations that are only too pleased to report on, the bad things that Israel is allegedly doing without any context. And, surprise, surprise, they've been very quiet when it comes to the release of Farhan saying that, it doesn't really matter and what else is happening in the world that we could blame on Israel. And I think, again, it goes to show that it's impossible to carry the narrative of the regime without looking like a fool. And I think that Khamenei now feels very much alone. Look, every day that passes, for every victory that the IDF is scoring against Hamas, is proving, number one, that Iran doesn't really have the back of its proxies, number one, that Arab blood is being spilled in the street. And I've actually written something in the Jerusalem Post a few months ago, talking to that very subject, that it's so easy for the RSGC and the regime in Tehran to be hiding behind its proxies. But what Arab capitals are now realizing, and I hope that they do, is that Arab blood is being spilled. Arab blood is being sacrificed at the altar of this, this ideology that the RSGC came up with, that Khamenei engineered and that Khamenei carried, since his death, since the death of Khamenei, I mean. And it's time to put an end to it, because it's not promoting Arab anything. It's not promoting their welfare. It's not promoting a strong region. It's not promoting a peaceful region or stability. It's not promoting the economy. It's not doing anything, that would benefit Arab capitals. And yet they're so willing to peddle it, and if not peddle it, to refuse to back Israel with everything that they've got, knowing that Israel is in the front line of this war against terror, and that themselves, and by that I mean Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and the UAE, even though the UAE is slightly different in that they signed the Abraham Accord, are not backing Israel the way that they should, bearing in mind that themselves, they are aware of the threat of Islamic radicalism, that they have done everything to keep it away from their borders, and that I think that the greatest testament to that is that they have refused to take on Palestinian refugees, and not for the idea or the notion that by doing so they would somewhat revoke the refugee status. I think it's just a clear sign that they do not want Hamas to break into their borders, and it's impossible to tell today from Gaza who's who, and so they decide to not accept anyone. Same goes for Egypt. I'd like for them to move away from this narrative of not doing anything or protecting only themselves quietly. With let's spell it out, let's just make a stand, let's stand with Israel. I wouldn't go as far as say sign the Abraham Accords today, although I would like them to, but at least to say, look, Israel is not the enemy. If anything, it's an ally of ours against the Islamic Republic, because the Islamic Republic is pushing an agenda that is, number one, sectarian in nature, genocidal in effect, and also profoundly anti-Sunni. And we need to remember, and I think this is for me the biggest takeaway when I was in Iran, that number one, this slogan that the regime continues to carry, death to America, death to Israel, has been misunderstood. What it really means by that is that death to America, and that America represents capitalism and democracy, Western liberal democracy, or so it says. And then death to Israel represents actually, and that came from the horse's mouth. Khamenei told me that himself, that by that they meant the sons and daughters of Jacob. And initially, I understood that as the Jewish people as a whole, not just Israel, but the Jewish people everywhere in the diaspora too. And then I thought about it a bit more, and I came to realize that actually it is the Judeo-Christian world that they are after. If we hold to the line that Jesus, of course, was from the tribe of Judah and is inscribed within the inheritance, or at least the legacy of Jacob, Israel. And so this is a threat that is posed and leveled at the Judeo-Christian world, and we're not paying attention. We are not paying attention, even though October 7th happened, even though we have seen in the streets of Paris and London the violence and the level of propaganda and the incitement to hatred, the fanning of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. We have seen the stabbing. We have seen churches being attacked. We have seen a synagogue in France, being burned with an attempt clearly to endanger and harm Jewish people. And it cannot go on. It cannot go on, because where do we draw the line? Where do we say enough is enough? Israel will be fine because Israel is defending itself. Israel is not under any illusion that its survival is not at stake. The same cannot be said of the Judeo-Christian world. And my fear is that we're going to see this line, this front line against terror, move away from Israel. Not that I don't want that to be true. I want that to be true, but I don't want that to be true, at the cost of the Judeo-Christian world and for Europe and the rest of the Western world to not be prepared and not understand that Israel, by criticizing Israel, by continuously leveling false accusation at Israel's feet, they are actually endangering themselves. And for me, it's a great concern.
So that really, people, I think, sometimes try to define the conflict between Israel and really the Iranian regime as a war of civilizations, when really it's not. If I understand you correctly, it's a war of liberal civilizations against barbarians that are trying to export terrorism, export genocidal ideas, and really undermine the fabric of Western societies. That seems to be the direction that they've chosen to go to. Is that a positive choice of theirs in your experience?
Is it a positive?
Is it a positive choice of the Iranians to undermine the Judeo-Christian world as really as part of their strategy?
Well, it is. I think they have done, I would say, the greatest victory, and where they've been very clever, is that they managed to convince the world that their war is against Israel. Israel, for me, is literally just an excuse and a way to distract the West by playing against anti-Semitism. So if you go back into the 1980s, when Khamenei, we realized that being a Shia minority within the Sunni Islamic world, wasn't going to play in his favor. And so he needed to build a bridge towards the Sunni world and to somewhat, remain relevant, at least as far as his ideology was concerned. And so he devised a very clever plan to back the pro-Palestinian cause and to weave it around his ideology and somehow link notions such as liberation and resistance within it. And he was successful. Look at Hamas, Hezbollah, and all those people that claim liberation, when really what they're doing is an exercise in colonization of the worst kind. It's not just territories, it's literally of the mind. And I've written something to that effect on the JNS, talking about Hamas and actually what does it look like, to live a life under Hamas, for people to, next time they say free Palestine or free whatever, maybe read a book, and most importantly, read the charter of that group that you seem to be so keen in supporting. What Iran is doing now with Israel is basically replicate that formula and use the anti-Semitism that unfortunately is still, very much alive. And we've seen it since October 7, how keen people were to, fly that flag and basically throw everything that they had, everything that is hateful that they carry within at Israel and say, you are the evil of the world. You are everything that is wrong with the world. When actually Israel, with everything that Israel has done so far, has been to try to improve people's life, to come up with clever way to, develop technology and to offer it back to the world, to come up with medical breakthrough and give it back to the world, to, stand true by international law and do everything it could as far as its military is concerned, to do that, to wage war as morally as possible. Now we're talking about wars. Of course, you're going to have, casualties. It's unfortunately a reality of war, but to have a military that is so concerned with preserving life and the sanctity of life is unheard of. And yet we're being bashed and blamed for things that we haven't done, when other crimes have been committed in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Yemen, in countless other countries across the world that the West has been guilty of, and no one is looking at it. And everything that we hear is about Israel. Israel is doing this, Israel is doing that. And so I would say the danger is that, again, we are being fooled into thinking that Israel is the end game. It's not. It's the very beginning of. Israel is, I would say, a test study, in that everything that Iran and the RGC are doing against Israel, awaiting the reaction of the West, will be used and exploited against the West when the time comes. And again, what I'm saying is this, is that there's a warning here. Israel is capable of defending itself. It has demonstrated it time and time again. The war will end. Israel will survive. Israel will prevail. I don't know if I can say the same thing about the West, when it's not even willing to realize that it has a problem. It has a problem because people are going through its borders without proper vetting. We don't even know who's coming. It has a problem because it doesn't want to attest to the reality of Islamic radicalism without feeling that it's being Islamophobic. And I think it's a disservice to moderate Muslim voices across the world, because they are being lumped with Islamic radicalism through the refusal to attest to the reality of Islamic radicalism. I think it's doing a disservice to multiculturalism by isolating Jewish communities and basically sending the message that we are pariahs, that we don't belong, and that we should go home. I'd like them to define what that home is and where it is, because I think that people are quite unclear. Sometimes it's Poland, sometimes in Israel, sometimes we don't know. Jews are real people. We belong. We belong wherever we decide to belong, as long as we follow the law. And Israel is our home. And this is not, it's not supposed to be, it's not open for debate. Israel is a sovereign state within its own borders. Again, not subject to interpretation. It's a reality. People need to get over it, because by doing so, by challenging Israel's sovereignty, what they don't realize that they're actually challenging the reality of their own sovereignty. And there's a danger there. But again, people are so intent on playing the anti-Semitism card that they can't see that they're playing the game of the regime, and that the regime wants them to make those arguments, because those arguments will be used against them when the time is right, and the time is getting closer. And I fear that our Jewish diaspora is in danger in the West. I fear that a narrative that I know will come, and that I've warned about for over 2 years now, but no one has listened, or when they did, they didn't do anything about it, is to basically paint us again, even though we would potentially be the victim of several attacks, to paint us as the instigators somehow, and to say that it did not happen in a vacuum. And this is something that Antonio Guterres from the UN has been very keen on saying, very quick on saying, right after October 7th. And the formulation of this narrative worries me, because I know exactly what it looks like and where it's going. It's to say that Jews deserve it, that they deserve to be pariahs, that they deserve to be castigated, that they deserve to be threatened and hurt and harmed, that they don't belong anywhere, and that they are basically the scapegoat that the world needs to atone for sins that we were not aware we committed. It's terrifying. And what terrifies me the most is that, again, people are not aware. And I fear that even our community is not aware of the very real threat. And I think that after October 7th, we can't afford to be complacent. We can't afford to not pay attention. And I don't think that, and what I've been accused before of being overly dramatic and trying to create a crisis, I'm not. What I believe is that if you are aware of the threat, then you can react and you can plan to protect yourself. And I think we owe it to our children. Most importantly, for me, it's about the next generation. What are we telling them if we are not doing everything that we can to protect them and give them a world that looks in a much better state than when we found it? And I think that forfeiting on our duty of care towards our children is a grave sin.
So sometimes, Catherine, it needs a conversation like this and a message to be articulated before you can really till it can really seep in and to hear what's being said. I want to focus on one thing many things, but one thing specifically at the moment of what you just said. It appears that probably the most successful messaging in this cognitive war, this war of really of hearts and minds that the Iranian regime has managed to spread around the world, and which is then forms the basis for, I think, what is modern day anti-Semitism, is really that call to destroy Zionism, focus on Zionism. We're only anti-Zionist, we're not anti-Israel, we're not anti-Jews. It seems to be that that was a very, very clever ploy of the Iranian regime that has then managed to really filter down and across the world to become really the focus of modern day anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. On the back of the show, it would be very hard for anyone to sell anti-Semitism and to say, yeah, it's fine. Because people will have a knee-jerk reaction to it, and not because they don't agree. It's just because it doesn't look good, and you would be guilty of a great sin that has been recognized universally as a sin, and so people kind of shy away from this. But now you give them anti-Zionism, and they're like, oh, that I can do. That I can do quite safely. That I can do, and hold the moral high ground, and climb on that horse and ride away in the sunset. And it's, for me, anti-Zionism is literally a reformulation, an iteration of the blood libel, and it has been done gloriously well, unfortunately. And people are so keen to jump into it and to hug that narrative and to make it their own, that they almost created an identity around it. And you could see this on the campus on Columbia University. You could see it in New York, you could see it in Los Angeles, you could see it everywhere, in London and Paris. Germany less so, because I think Germany had the bad taste when it comes to doing anything against the Jews, and so they kind of abstain. But it's insane to me that people that claim to be liberal would so easily hate an entire group of people on the basis they're not quite sure of, because it's very loose, committing acts of genocide, and then very, you could see where the fault line starts, where, because if truly it was just against the state of Israel, and you would argue genocide, which is ridiculous, of course, but let's just go with the logic that they have, then why blame the Jews? If truly it's about anti-Zionism, and yet they do, and it really tells you exactly who they are when they do that, because this exercise of, oh, you're a Jew, therefore you're a Zionist. Well, yes, of course. It's like, accusing a woman of not being a feminist. Well, why would she not want to, to promote her own rights? But it doesn't mean that she has to be a radical. It's the same thing about being a Zionist. I consider myself to be a Zionist. I'm not radical in my views. I'm smart enough to know that people, need a space in which to exist. And that goes for everybody, including the Palestinians. Now, would I want to cohabitate with people who do want to genocide myself and my people? No, of course not. Why would I? It's a ridiculous notion to be asking Israel to cozy up to a group, Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and befriend them on the basis that this is what the world wants us to do. No. And so, yes, the regime has done a great job at selling anti-Zionism and not calling it anti-Semitism, but it is anti-Semitism of the worst form, because it's actually hiding. Hitler at least had the courtesy of being honest about his views and was very clear. People followed because they wanted to. Now the regime is literally hiding its spots and claiming to be something that it's not. But people are falling for it, and they're falling for it because they want to. I don't believe for a second. I know that the argument has been made that people in America and in the West in general are not educated enough in the region to understand the dynamics of what they say. I disagree. I think they know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it because there's something so profoundly hateful about them, and they want to find a scapegoat. And it's so easy, and it's been taught to hate the Jews, and so they do it, and they do it happily. And there will come a time where it won't look good. Everything lives forever on social media, so I wish them good luck, because they won't be able to run away from that one. But would they be able to claim ignorance? I'm afraid that they will. I don't want them to get away with it, because they need to atone for their sins, and it starts with accountability. You cannot wish away an entire people and say, I did not know. Yes, you did. When you say free Palestine, even if you don't know what river and what sea in between, I don't actually care. I don't care, because you said it. You said it knowing what you were saying, and you're trying not to hide and pretend that you did not know. If you are willing enough, and I would say able enough to say those words, then actually you should be held accountable for them, even if you don't understand. Because the second you open your mouth, I'm going to take the view that you do. And if you don't, then shut up. But, unfortunately, they're still very vocal. So, and they want to parrot the regime. The regime is a terrorist organization, the greatest that we have ever seen being set up in the world. And it has many, many proxies. And unfortunately, I think that many states officials, I'm not going to say who, because I would be sued, are towing the line of the regime. And so I'm asking the question, on whose side are you? Because if you're not on Israel's side, I'm afraid that you are on the other side, and that's not a good spot to be in.
So I sometimes try to argue that the position of the Western US, European leadership towards the area is really fundamentally racist in its outlook. Not necessarily from the point of anti-Semitism, which you touch on, but rather this idea that, well, the Arabs don't really mean what they say. They don't really mean that they want to murder all the Jews. When they say from the river to the sea, well, they're going to let the Jews be second-class citizens there. It isn't necessarily genocidal in its nature. Khamenei doesn't really mean to kill all the Jews. And so really it's the Jews that have to show more flexibility.
No, I know. I mean, like, the impotence of us, to want to live as equal citizens on our land. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? I mean, it's insane. I mean, the fact that those ideas could be even formulated is so anti-Semitic to me that it just baffles me that people can't even hear themselves say those things. Because if you were to replace, the word Jew by pick an ethnicity, and I think that, people would be up in arms screaming and, calling you a racist or a xenophobe, and they would be right. The fact that people are so happy to digest this when we say Jews or Israelis, it just baffles me. Again, Israel is a sovereign state. Israel does not commit acts of genocide. It's a case of great projection. Israel has never committed a genocide. A genocide would actually mean that there would be a dip in demographic. There was never one, as far as the Palestinian population is concerned. Israel, however, has had to deal with terrorism since the beginning. And sometimes, and I would say this, if Israel, with all the technology that it has at its disposal, and clearly the miracles that the IDF can actually perform on the ground, if really Israel wanted to commit acts of genocide, I think the question would have been dealt with a long, long time ago. The fact that it hasn't, the fact that, population in Palestinian territories, including Gaza, have, gone up tenfold, if not more than that, over the past 50 years, just tells you that it's not committing acts of genocide. Israel is not an apartheid state. I think that has been proven, yesterday, because we freed an Arab Israeli, and so should we. We had just the same duty of care towards him that we have towards anyone else. And look, if anyone comes to Israel and actually walks the streets of, whether it's Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, people don't walk around asking each other, are you a Jew? Are you a Christian? Are you a Muslim? Are you a Druze? Are you Yazidi? Are you whatever? Because nobody cares. The point is, you have a people wanting to live their life and to actually do something with themselves. And maybe we should do the same here in the UK and everywhere else. Maybe people should stop asking questions, judging other people by the color of their skin, the level of melanin, whether it's summer, winter, it depends. Who cares? People are people. As long as people follow the law, don't break it, and strive to do better. What's the problem? Who cares where they come from? Again, Israel doesn't seem to, but the whole world seems to have an opinion on why Israel is doing that when it's not doing it. I don't understand. I think it's just a projection of, the world's sin onto Israel to try to abstain themselves from being held accountable when Israel is doing none of it. And it makes me laugh because I know that there's a point where there will be this great realization that actually, no, it's not happening in Israel, and that the issue is with the rest of the world, not with us. And that maybe actually they should take a page out of a book and read it. Read and learn that, the sanctity of life in Israel is respected. That this is something that comes with a long, long, long tradition. That we're not about to give up because this is not who we are, that we're striving to do better. They are welcome to come and do better with us. If they don't, well, then I'm afraid we're going to have to fight, but not in the way that they think. We're not out there to wage war. We wage defensive war. What we strive to do is to better ourselves. And if we have to do it alone, we will. But then people should not be surprised if you're not willing to share. In that bet.
You see the danger that Israel is facing, and really denying or attacking Zionism is really denying that same. Really, Zionism is just an embodiment of the Jewish right to self-determination in its historical homeland. That's something which, if you were to deny that to anyone else, you would obviously be called a racist. If you were to deny that to the Palestinians, this newly formed body of people, then you're clearly racist and you're prejudicial to their rights. But when it comes to attacking Zionism, attacking the Jewish right to self-determination, that seems that that's something that's much more accepted on the street today. It's something that's very clear. And if I understand correctly, it's only the precursor for the next step. Once we've finished with the Saturday people, we'll move on to the Sunday people.
It's already happening, but I tell you something else. You know, for me, Zionism, and maybe this is just for me. And actually, I was very surprised. I published something in the Daily Express for We Believe in Israel, and I really wanted to, to define what Zionism was for us as an organization. And it was published, and I didn't mention once Britain, so I was actually quite surprised that the third most read publication in the UK was willing to do that, and I'm so grateful that they did. But for me, Zionism, it's also about freedom. It's about attesting and affirming not just Jewish right. It's about your own individuality to say I am and I stand. And for me, it's a very powerful cry for it's liberation and freedom at the same time. It's an assertion of identity and also a desire to tell the world that I don't need your validation for me to exist and be here. A French philosopher used to say that I think, therefore I am. And I think that with Zionism is different. It's like I am as I therefore I am. I am because I am a Zionist. And then for me, Zionism allows me to be truly and fully myself in all the complexity that means. And, just as there's over 50 million ways of being Jewish, the same with Zionism. It's an expression of an identity, an individual identity within a group. We are a tribe ultimately. And for me, it's the best way to define us as a people is to, is Zionism. Because there's so many iterations of it, and they're all beautiful and they're all true, and they don't stand in conflict with one another, which is actually quite rare when it comes to any ideas or principle. And I think that it encompasses also the beauty of multiculturalism. This ability that people have to be different, and yet they are united by a common thread that is so strong and so clear that it allows people to not be in conflict with one another, but move together in respect of their own differences. And that is such a powerful message that I wish the world could embrace. And I wish for the world to be Zionist in their own way, for their own country, and rejoice in their sovereignty, because anything else for me is treason. And what are you doing? Why do you actually want to live under the yoke of Hamas or Hezbollah or even the RSGC? Iranians have desperately called for people to free them from the regime because they feel colonized, and yet the world continues to concentrate on Israel and say, "Oh, you have colonized." We have colonized nothing. If anything, we stand on our land. It's the greatest exercise in decolonization, and yet people are accusing us of committing a crime of colonization. But they're not talking about Iraq being colonized by the RSGC. They're not talking about Yemen being colonized by the RSGC, or so many other countries in the region, including Lebanon, that is literally losing its identity, its religious identity, and being absorbed by Hezbollah. And even they, those groups that claim to be Shia Muslim, are not even representing Shia Islam. They're trying to absorb them into this, Khomenism and this cult of the personality that doesn't resemble anything from the scriptures. And so this, people have so many things that they should be standing against. And stop busying yourself in being against Israel. Israel has nothing to do with anything. If anything, it's your greatest friend. And you're doing yourself a great disservice by not standing by Israel. And I believe, and I've said it, and I will continue to say it until I'm blue in the face, the world has every interest at throwing everything it has, and I mean that, behind Israel. Because if you don't, and if they don't help Israel win this war quick and destroy the regime in Tehran, then I'm afraid that Israel will survive and thrive while the West will have to battle the Islamic Republic of Iran, because it will come a time where they have no choice. They will not be able to hide anymore. And they may have to do it without Israel, because Israel has stood alone so far in its fight, not completely, but mainly. And it's not okay. It's not okay.
When you talk about the motivations of the IRGC, of the Khomeinism, as you call it. It comes from a place of very, very clear knowledge, very, very clear understanding from personal experience. How do we pass that understanding on to Western leaders, to Western society? Because that's something that it appears to me that they're just not willing or unable to understand, to break that barrier almost of willful blindness, actually take these people for what they're saying. How do we get that message across?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know, Morris, because I've tried for years, and I'm baffled because look, in 2022, I've written in the Jerusalem Post, I talked about, you know, the mapping of the Jewish diaspora, and I warned against this plan that Iran had concocted. And I was there. I mean, they talked, you know, I was there in Tehran. It was, you know, it was a breakaway session from the Palestine conference, where I literally stood meters away from you know, several people from leaders from Hamas, just saying, you know, death to Israel, death to America. And I was like meters away thinking like, doesn't look good for me. And, you know, they explained to me what they wanted to do, and, you know, trying to, you know, to just literally mapping out for me this agenda that they had. And I was thinking, okay, so let me talk about it now, because it makes sense. I could start to see the crumbs of information that would allow me to, you know, to make people realize that, yes, this is not, you know, a figment of my imagination. This is real. It's happening. Look at the crumbs that they're leaving for us. And then the story broke out. A few months after that, the Jewish Chronicles, you know, ran an entire feature on the story. That was actually 48 hours later confirmed and validated by, you know, the then Minister for Security in the UK. And so it was made clear that, yes, everything I had said so far was true. It was backed by intelligence, that the Minister of Security was willing now to come out and say, you know, we know. And my question now is, okay, so what have you done about it? And I'm not saying that the government owes me any favor in saying, hey, Catherine, let me tell you what we're doing behind closed doors. But I'm talking in terms of, you know, the Jewish community, in terms of even, you know, a government official that could still say something, or at least maybe not make it worse for Israel or the Jewish community by saying that everything actually exists in our head, that no, we're not a threat, that yes, there is a problem. And what can we do to make things better? What can we do to protect each other? Because again, the Jewish diaspora is not a foreign element within society. You know, Jews in Britain are not foreign agents. They are British. You know, same thing goes for America and France and Germany and any other country for that matter. And so what is being done to protect, you know, your own nationals? And I don't know if anything is being done. I hope that something is being done, but we don't know about it, and we don't know anything about it. So what I'm saying is, you know, what's the plan? Are people actually aware of the reality of the situation? And again, I'm not saying any of those things because I want people to panic. What I want is people to be aware. I went to, you know, I took risks, but that is my problem. That was my choice. Nobody forced me. And so I'm a big girl, and I don't expect people to say thank you or even to feel sorry for me, because they shouldn't. I knew what I was doing, mainly, not all the time, but, you know, for the most part. But if someone is telling you the truth and someone is warning you, and you have every reason to believe that this person is telling the truth, why aren't you changing your behavior and your mind and actually saying, okay, let's come up with a plan. Let's make sure that the next time someone comes along and says something and shows enough proof, or at least has a reasonable, you know, narrative that demonstrates and prove that, yes, maybe she's not completely crazy. Do something, listen to people. Do not let people tell you twice who they are or show you twice. They've shown us already. October 7th happened. It's the most single terrible thing that has happened to us as a people since the Shoah. And who are we to dishonor the memory of the fallen by not doing something and ensuring that the next generation, our generation, us, our children, are protected? And I mean protected to the point where nothing can happen to them. And I know that we can't protect people forever and all the time, but we have a duty of care. We have to do the best we can. And right now it's not good enough. And I'm sorry. I know that we have an insurmountable task at hand. We need to free our hostages. We have many things that we need to do. But the Jewish diaspora needs to get basically the act together and do something. And this is not an attack or a criticism. This is me. This is out of love. I'm saying, please protect yourself. I don't want to see bloodshed. I do not want to lose any more people. I don't want us to mourn anymore. What I want us to do is to take a proactive stance against the RSGC, the regime. I want to see this organization proscribed. I want everyone to prescribe this organization. I want people to be clear about who is Hamas, who is Hezbollah, what they do, to stop, flying their flag across the streets of Europe and America. I want people to be educated. I want university to take the responsibility of educating the next generation seriously and to stop peddling, terrorism. I want people to be accountable for what they say on social media, not to end free speech. Let them say what they want, but for us to hold them accountable for what they say, because aiding and abetting terrorism is illegal under international law. And yet, people are happy to be refunding UNRWA that has proven to have ties with Hamas by saying, no, the proof are not, sufficient enough. Well, I don't know. There was pictures and there was videotapes of UNRWA employees, being amongst Hamas. So, I mean, I'm sorry, if it walks like a dog, talk like a dog, it's a dog. Hamas is Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. What are we doing? The UN, the beautiful UN, the United Nations. I'm so glad that they just omitted completely, not just a little bit, but completely, to mention, Jews and Israelis, from their commemoration, discussing the fallen victims of terrorism.
Terrorism Day.
I mean, come on. This is revisionism at its worst. And this is something out of the playbook of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so my question is this: if you are not serving international law, and by extension here, the state of Israel, if you are not actually attesting to what has gone on in Israel and the suffering that Israelis have gone through, and I'm saying Israelis, I'm not saying Jews, I'm saying Israelis, as in Christian, Jews, Muslims, I actually don't care, atheists, whatever you want, and say something terrible was done to them and against them, then I'm sorry, but you are no better than the RSGC. Question is to be answered.
What you really described previously, Catherine, is if there was ever a point that we could give any type of really force to the idea of never again, it would be the ability to identify something like the Wannsee Conference and say, where these Nazis are getting together, they're mapping out the Jewish communities around the world and preparing them for destruction. That would be a point to intervene. And yet you're saying now that that's exactly what Iran has done, what the regime has done, and this is falling on deaf ears.
It's worse than that. It's just like, okay, we keep saying this, it's falling on deaf ears, but are you sure? Because there must be a point where we have to say, if they keep doing what they're doing, and we keep giving them proof of what they're doing and telling them you are serving the agenda of their RSGC, and they discard those proof by alleging that it's not enough, that it's not precise enough, that it's an exercise in Hasbara, that we are serving our own interests. Then my question is this: do you not know, or do you actually know exactly what you're doing but ignoring us because we are the agenda? Is my question. We have to ask this question at some point, because how long? How many times do we need the United Nations to say the things that it says, to do the things that it does, to literally excuse whitewash terrorism, the worst kind possible, and for us to continue to believe that the UN is actually an institution that has a leg to stand on? And I'm sorry to say, I believe the UN right now to be serving an agenda that is very close to the RSGC, and question is to be asked. And they're harsh question, but if we don't ask them, we're not serious about protecting our people.
So I'll say that possibly a little bit more bluntly than you did. How many dead Jews do you need in order to persuade the world that these people actually intend on committing a genocide? But as we, unfortunately, Catherine, our time is running out. I end these programs, or at least I try to end the programs on a positive note. Give us a short positive message going forward. Where are we winning the battle?
Well, we are winning the battle, because the RGC and Khamenei are actually terrified, and I recognize this in the speech that Hassan Nasrallah gave just a few days ago. It was very apologetic. They're scared. They're running scared. They're running out of runway, and I'm really happy that they are. I think the IDF is closing in on them, not just on the ground, but we're winning the narrative, at least at home, with the diaspora. I think that the Jewish people are united. And that gives me great joy, because it's beautiful to see when we move together, miracles happens. It happened many times over across history. you could see it happening. And I think that there's also a shift, with the Arab capitals, where they start to see the power that Israel actually holds. And they start to realize that it's a much better bet for them to be on the side of Israel and supporting Israel, because the future is there, rather than support the IRGC. And I think that you could see signs now also within the regime that cracks are appearing. There's a lot of fear, paranoia. The one thing that I would like to say that is not talked about is that what you see happening right now, the arrests in Iran, allegations of collaboration with Mossad, whatever. It's actually a sign that there's a bit of a purge taking place in the regime, and that is because there's an agenda that was set out years ago. Should the leadership falter, and by that I mean Khamenei, if he was in a position where he could not hold the country together anymore, for the IRGC to actually enact a coup and actually rebrand the Islamic Republic under a military dictatorship. And I could see this happening. So we need to be mindful of this and understand that, there is a possibility that actually the regime is cracking from within, and that we might see change a lot faster than we think. It doesn't mean we're going to be any safer, because you're going to have proxies of Iran that are going to be left very much alone. And I don't know what that means on the ground and how they would react, whether they would stop or just go rogue.
Well, so I'm not sure if that's a positive message or.
I think it's a positive, because we're winning. We're winning against a regime that is tentacular. So I say it's yay us, but
That really getting rid of the evil that there is definitely something positive. It may be replaced by another evil, but we never know.
That's for another day.
We'll leave for another day. Catherine, thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you for your great insights. And I reserve the right to call on you again.
Please do.
To help us better understand what's going on. In the meantime, good luck with all of your efforts. And really to everyone around us, we'll be back with you again next week. In the meantime, just stay safe and Shabbat Shalom to everyone.